By the end of this video, you will have learned how to create a front end like this and how to create a UI like this in WPF. And you will also learn how to set up the Google authentication in Google Cloud Console, set up the basic authentication and implement them in WPF. So you have a window like this, press here, log in using your account. The login is done, sign out, log in with a different account this time, login is successful and the application is authenticated with the new user. So we will be learning how to do all this process in this video. So let's go ahead. Hello, this video we will be looking at implementing Google authentication in a WPF application. Before we talk about implementing the authentication, first let us discuss how usually this authentication happens. In general, we have some sort of application. It could be a mobile app or a desktop or web app, whatever it is. We will usually show a login page. This is how we are used to. Once we enter that, then it will talk to its backend servers. There could be maybe this whole login authentication process itself may be maintained by our own internal servers, or maybe we are already hosting our application in some cloud service, and we are discussing or we are we are transporting our authentication requests to those servers, and we deal with the authentication process itself. Now, this is very good in terms of a developer, but just think about it in the terms of a user. In the user perspective, users usually feel very insecure about sharing their credentials with all their applications. For instance, if I take myself as an example, I have different sets of passwords for different varieties of web applications. So, like for my bank accounts, I have different passwords for different bank accounts. For my personal email and office emails, I have different passwords. And for less critical applications like a travel aggregator or something like Zomato, where a food aggregator, I have a different password for these things. So the reason is, tomorrow if one of this application is compromised, I don't want all my other applications to be compromised as well. So this mentality will be there for all the users. When you just show them up with a username and password, maybe it put them off. What if instead of showing them with a login page, you just give them a new option called as social login? You just tell them, okay, you don't have to create an account with me, but in case you want to do, you can still do that. But if you are so busy, just sign in with your Google, Facebook, Apple, or whatever you want. So they already have an account with at least one of the items, so they will just click that, and that's it. At while are you signed in, and you can just start using the application. It feels very easy for the end user perspective. As a developer, maybe you might need to set up more. You already have some sort of external or a backend server where you are dealing with your application data. Now, along with storing and handling your application data, you also need to communicate with an external database server or a service for the authentication as well. So it's a little bit of work for the developer, but for the end user, it just adds more flexibility, and that's what we need. At the end of the day, our application should be more accessible to the end users. So in this case, you don't have to maintain your backend servers for authentication purpose alone. So this video we will split it into 4 parts. First part, we will talk about Open Authentication 2.0, because that is what Google uses. We will try to have a basic understanding of what it is. After we are done with that, second part, we will open up Google OAuth account there, and third part, we will build a WPF application which will be very minimal. We will have a login page, and then we will have a landing page. So after we build this UI itself, finally we will implement the authentication. So from step 2, we created some credentials. We'll take those credentials and add it to our WPF application. So these are the 4 parts that we will be focusing on in this video. To understand about open authentication, we need to first see that there are 2 parts to it. On one side, you have our client applications. It could be anything. It could be a web, mobile, or desktop application, which is basically our client. And on the other side, we have server. So our client will be dealing with the server for authentication process. To explain it in a very simple way, we will just enact how the conversation will happen. We will just imagine that these are all some persons talking to each other. How will they be discussing? So on first instance or first step, the client will just call the Google server and say, hey, a user has come to me and he has said that he has an account with you, and I just want you to validate that. The client calls the Google server and says, I have a person who is claiming that he has an account with you, and these are the scopes that he is requesting. And then the server says, okay, so you tell me that there is a person, a user who claims to have an account with me. Okay, how do I know that he has an account with me? So you do one thing, go to your user and confirm that he has an account with me with this login page. So server returns back a login page. In our case in Google, it returns back a login page, and now your client receives this login page. Now let us introduce the user. Let's call him as Joe. The client will go to the user Joe and say, okay, Joe, you tell me that you have an account with Google server. Okay, he has sent me this login page. Why don't you prove yourself? Just enter your user credentials and approve it. That's the third step. And then user says, okay, you want me to prove myself? I will enter my username, password, and this is it. This is my grant info. I already approved myself with Google server. This is the grant info. Just take this grant info and go back to Google server and deal whatever you want to do. And then the client will go to the server and say, hey, I received the grant info from my user. And then the server validates the grant info and everything is in order, and server says, okay, so I approve it. So you have a valid user who has a very genuine account with me. So this is access token. I use this token and you do whatever you want. And then it returns back with the token. Now, client does not need to go to the user every time and then show him with a login page for all the requests, because that was done in step 2 and 3. Now, every authorization is done. We are now provided with an access token. This is kind of like a entry pass for the subsequent or the future request. So once the access token is issued to the client, now the client can do queries to the server which are falling within the scope that we did in the first step. For instance, the scope could be anything. Like the scope could be like, okay, the user says, I am granting the permission to the client to do scope 1, access my name, scope 2, access my photos, scope 3, access the files in my account. So those are the scopes the user gave grant to in step number 4. Within the scope, now the client can get all the information within the scope from the server without waiting for the user authentication every time, because we already have the access token. For instance, the client will ask the server, what is my name? Like when I say what is my name, it is what is the user's name. Server will now check the access token which comes with that and then says, okay, access token is valid, and the client is asking what is the name of the user. So since the access token is valid, which means the user has already approved it. Now whether the access token, I can give the user's name within the scope. It goes to step number 1 and sees the scope. Okay, so in this scope I can give him. So it says, hey, your name is Joe. So that's it. Using the access token, I got my first information, and then again I can use repeat the step number 7 and 8 and say, okay, the client will send what is my picture, what is the files. Maybe I will try, the client will try to access something like what is the user password, and then the server says, no, the user password is not within the scope. I will not share you the user password. This is denied. So this is the basic way how the whole open authentication happens. So when we look into this client, user, server and all these things, we can see that there are 3 entities in play. Let us take the step number 1, 2, 5 and 6, these steps. So we could clearly see that what are we doing here? We are only dealing with authorization. We are requesting the scope, we are getting the approval page, we are granting the info, and finally we are dealing with access token. So these steps we are dealing with an entity called authorization server. And then look at the steps number 3 and 4, this one. So what are we doing here? We are dealing with the user for getting his permission. So basically what we are doing here is we are dealing with an entity called as a resource owner. So resource owner is nothing but a person, user whose account is with the server, from where the application needs to get the resources, like whether the picture is a resource, or name, or email, or maybe in case of a Google Drive, the files present there. So those are the resources which are present in a resource server, from where the resource owner is giving authorization. So when we look into step number 7 and 8, these we are dealing with an entity called as a resource server. So basically in open authentication there are three entities that our application deals with: an authorization server, resource server, and a resource owner. So resource owner is clear because he or she is the person who is the owner of the resource, but this other two, authorization server and the resource server, are a little unclear, because most of the time we will not be having or knowing the differentiation between these two, because to us we are calling the APIs for authorization, and then we are calling another set of APIs for accessing the resource. That's what happens most of the times. You will not find the difference, but there is a difference between authorization server and resource server. Let us take this example. Google has different entities. It has Google Drive, it has Gmail, it has G Cloud, and it also has YouTube. So YouTube is not a part of Google from the beginning. It was acquired by Google in 2006. YouTube was founded in 2005, and Google acquired it a year later. So which means that these two are two different servers with two different database sets. But once it is a single company, with Google login, you can access the information or your videos or details from YouTube server. So this is what we mean by two different servers. You can set up authorization with Google server, and user authorizes it. Then you can use that information access token, and you can get the information from a resource server, which is nothing but your YouTube. So most cases you will not be feeling any difference, but this is just for your understanding that there are three entities at play. Let us go back to this initial step. Just look at step number 1 now. This is looking isolated. So let us just discuss about this in detail. So let us focus here what's happening. Now, the client itself is telling the Google server that I have a user with this scope and request, so can you just approve it? What if at a later stage this client turns out to be someone suspicious, someone with a malicious intent? So the client is not a genuine application. So it is a malicious intent application which tries to steal your data. So without knowing about this client, the user just gives his username and password, and then the user realizes, no, 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 I made a serious grave mistake. Let me go back to my server and then just revoke the success. So the user comes back to the server and says, hey, sometime back the client came to me with this login page. I gave him the password. I made a mistake. I should not have given him that access. So please revoke that. And then the Google server says, no, I don't know. I don't have any information about the client. This is a very bad scenario because the server has no idea about client. The client cannot just like that come and request for the scope, and the server cannot give the access token back, because at any time as a user, the user will have the full authority or the rights to go back to the server and revoke the access token that was granted to the client. So there is a possibility. So this is one of the very important thing in an open authentication protocol. the server should, I repeat again, the server should have a prior knowledge about the client. This is a very important and a mandatory step. There are several benefits to it. One, the resource owner can always revoke the access, and resource owner have full authority over to whom, to which application the resource owner can grant his access. So that is the first benefit. And second important benefit is to protect the server itself. What if there is no prior knowledge about the client itself? What happens? Then even as a developer, I can create or set up a console application in C sharp and just spam the Google server, raising millions of requests per second. It is a possibility. So when something like this happen, the server will be brought down because it doesn't know from where the client application. Maybe it can deal with the IP address, but then again, still any client can be requesting to the Google server and spamming it. So to avoid this, if a client or if the server believes that a client is trying to misuse this, it can easily just stop this client, provided the server knows something about the client in the first place. So because of this, there is a very crucial step, or the most important step, before the open authentication itself begins, which is called as client registration. So each client application that we develop should be registered with the server. The server should know that there is a client which at a later stage might come back with this request or scope or whatever it is. Now this is not something that is only limited to uh, open authentication 2.0, because this is the same case for open authentication 1.0 as well, and it is also the same case for other protocols like single sign-on SSO, also follows the same protocol. All the applications should first register themselves with the server before they can raise this request. What happens during this registration process? The server will issue a client ID and a secret to the client. So for any request, the first step, the client should send in its ID and the secret and say, hey, I am the client with this is my ID, this is my secret. So client should first validate itself before it is raising the request. So this is the most important and the first step. So now that we know that the client registration process, we could see that overall there are several credentials in place, several credentials in action. One, the user enters his username password, the client itself shares his client ID password, and then the access token. But out of all these things, the application itself will have access to only two items. One is the client ID with credentials, which is nothing but its ID and secret, and the second one is the access token provided by the server. Now this client credentials are very crucial and important, because you, as an application, maybe it is an Android app or a web app, or for web app this is a little bit okay, but for desktop applications and Android applications, you will be giving your application directly to the user's device. So which means that they will have, there is a possibility they can decompile or look into the code. It is still a possibility. So the client secret should, I repeat again, never reside within your application. There is a queue here which is secret. The name itself is secret because it should be kept a secret. You should not be putting that client secret inside your application. It should be handled separately in a secure server. So each client will have a secret. You need to keep that secret a secret and keep it in a secure server. So it an a desirable or an ideal application would be when the user tries to log in using his social account, a Google account, it will then communicate this information to the server, a secure server. Then the server will communicate with the Google server and share its client secret and get this login page and return it back to the user, and then again the user's grant will be sent back to the server. So this is some steps that as a developer you need to take to protect your secrets. So that's it. This is all about open authentication. This is a very basic and a bare minimum information. If you wish to learn more about open authentication, I will suggest taking a look at this URL. I will post this URL in the description. So just take a look into it, and then now we can move into the next part. Let's go ahead and search for Google Cloud. Okay, so we have cloud.google.com. I already have a couple of accounts with Google Cloud, but for this video what I will do, I will create a new account. I have already created a new email ID, and I will just start showing you how to set everything from scratch. You could see that for my current user, it shows go to console, which means I already have a console, but I have created a new account. Let us start by setting it up. So my new account name is mouseevents.youtube@gmail.com. So let's start with get started for free. It shows my email ID and then the country where I am. Let's give it is a startup or something small. I have read. I don't wish to receive email updates. And that's it. When you do registration for the first time, it's giving you $300 credit, which you can use. I believe. Okay, now it is spent over the next 90 days. Yearly reduced to be spent over 1 year. Let's find. Okay, here we go. Let us give some names here. I will say this is business name is Mouse Events YouTube. Now the reason for a card number is that Google, when you sign up, gives you $300 free credit. So there is a possibility people can create multiple accounts like what I'm doing now with different email IDs. So to avoid that misuse, they need a card number with valid details, but the money will not be debited. You can always cancel your credit card at a later stage. I will just enter my credit card details. Okay, so the details are here. I will start my free trial. So now that we have created or activated our account with Google Cloud Console, I created a new project. Initially it was my first project or something. I just checked some settings and then I deleted it. I created a new project, but in your case you don't have to do that. If you want to create a new project, you can create it. First and foremost thing, you go inside your APIs and services, just open it up. What is the end goal or the end objective that we are expecting from this whole operation? We are trying to register our client with the Google server. That is our goal here. That's what we are trying to see. And what is the result that we are expecting? After the registration, the Google server should give us with a client ID and then a client secret. So this is what we need. So we can directly go to the credentials and we can start requesting for a credential. But what happens? To ask for a credential itself, let's see. To open up a client ID, you must first configure your consent screen. So there are a couple of steps which are required to achieve your end results. Since I already know what are the steps required, I can directly go ahead and set up the library consent screen, set up the APIs, but I don't want to do that because I want you also to understand how everything is done step by step. So go into your credentials. If you already have a consent screen, you will not be seeing this. But if you don't have a consent screen, it will ask you to configure the consent screen. Consent screen is nothing but when you open up your application, it will show you a page from Google which says, hey, this application, like for instance, whatever name that we are going to give, is trying to access your this scope, 2 this scope, 3 this scope, whatever we discussed here. So the login page, whatever we are going to show to the user, we need to define it here. There are two things, internal and external. Internal is when your organization itself is using their email service with Google, but I don't think we need that. External is when you expect someone else with their Gmail ID like abc123@gmail.com to log into your application. So let's go with external. You would see that the external application itself, this is how it will be. Sign in with Google, and then app name, whatever the name that you're going to give, wants to access your Google account, and select what app can access. So basically the scopes that we'll give, make sure you trust the app name, blah 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 blah. And here there is one important thing now. When we are dealing with external application, you need to publish it so that external users can make use of it. Unless you publish, it will be a test application. So let us just go ahead and give some names. We call it as YouTube desktop demo app. It's a long name, but still. And support email, I created this email itself, as I said before, mouse.events.it@gmail.com, only for preparing this video. And logo, I'm not going to add any logo at present, and there is no email pages for this. Of course, there is an email. I purchased domain mouse.events. And developer address, I will give the same. What it says, it should begin with the schema, HTTP. Okay, we have now. Okay, we don't need this one, then it will be expecting us to give the domain. So save and continue. The consent page is done. Then we need to give the scopes. How do you know the scopes? So we have already seen here. In first step, we will be defining the scopes. Like scope means whether the user will be able to access your photo or images or files. Those are the scopes that your application will have access to. Where can I find the scopes? You see, there are something called add or remove scopes. Let's open it up. Currently, there are 25 scopes. What are they? There are by default basic scopes which are not relevant to or related to any API by default. These are all basic scopes. And then I have some BigQuery scopes, cloud logging scopes, and different scopes. If you want to enable more scopes, like if you want to enable YouTube scopes, Google Drive scopes, go to your Google API library, which is here, enabled API libraries. When you click this, you will obviously go here. So I will directly open it up in a separate page. You might have already noticed we have only 25 scopes. Let's go here, search for some scopes. And where can I search for scopes? Enable APIs and scopes. Yeah, here. Let me search for YouTube. So it should give me all the YouTube API. So when this is enabled, then our application can, it's not like it will have, it can have these scopes provided if you need to add it. Or let us say we need a Google Drive scope. I will just say I will add a Google Drive scope. Enable the scope. Once the scope itself is enabled, I can go back here, refresh the page. It is still enabling, but let me assume that it is already done. Okay, go to my next page. Add or remove scopes. Now instead of 25 we have 41, which means we have Google Drive scopes also added to our list of enabled APIs and scopes. This is what we need. But what we are going to do, for this demo, we are only going to give basic scopes, and which are non-sensitive scopes. Email ID and then the profile. That's it. That's more than enough for us. Update. And these two scopes are now added here. So these are the two scopes using which your application can access. You can always go back here, edit and add more scopes, but at present we are limiting it to only two scopes because our main idea is just to connect to Google API, and then once the authorization is complete, we are going to use that as a login information, like authenticating. Save and continue. So now, as I said before in the first page, this is a test application. So when it is set for testing, only limited number of users can use. So you can have up to 100. I will add a couple of my email IDs. I have something called frontend.frenzy.youtube@gmail.com, something that I created a few minutes back. mouse.events.youtube@gmail.com. These two are enough, which means that only with this two email IDs, this whole application could be accessed. Add it. Did it add? Add it. Save and continue. Okay, now our application consent screen is created. Go back to the dashboard. Where were we first? We were in the credentials. Go back to the credentials. We were trying to create credentials, and it was saying that we need to set up our Auth screen. Now that the credential itself is Auth screen itself is set up, go ahead and create the credentials. Just see here, there are different items. Just go with OAuth client ID, because that's what we need. We need a client ID and a secret. For this, we will take desktop app. There won't be much difference between them all. Almost everything will be the same. And I will show something after we create this credential ID. I will go ahead and show something where you can see what is the difference between all these things. But currently, let's go with desktop app and give it a name called YouTube Desktop. YouTube Desktop Creator. Remember, your secret should be a secret. The reason why I am displaying it in this YouTube video is because I will be deleting this email ID, I will be deleting this whole account itself, and all these applications, whatever we are showing here, I will be deleting it. So that's the reason why I'm showing it here. But in your case, the secret should be a secret, and client ID is not that much of a secret. You can store it in your application. Now I will open up a notepad, copy the ID so that we can use it later. Copy the secret. The secret is here, ID is here. This is very important. I repeat again, secret should be a secret. Now the reason why I'm showing is this will be deleted. I will, after the video is done, I will select and I will delete this client ID itself. So that's it. We are now done with creating an user client ID and then a client secret. Now what is needed? So once we know that we need to make a request with a certain scope. We already set the scope, we already set the login page. We also have the client ID and then the client secret. Now what is missing? We know that we need to make a request to Google server, but where? Where do we need to make the request? Where is the endpoint? What is the API? We don't know all these things. So you need to go to something called, you can search here itself, from here itself you can search. You can search for authentication or authorization policies. Authorization policies. If it doesn't work, now these are not something that we need because we are still in the Google Cloud Console. I will suggest there are two ways how we can reach the authorization policies of Google. One, you can search directly here in Google URL, or you can go to developers.google.com. But I will suggest not going to developers.google.com, because tomorrow this might itself be changing, but there is no guarantee that this domain itself will be retained. Let's search here, authorization policies. Okay, OAuth 2 policies, authorization pages is here, and comply with policies here. Open it up. This is what we need. So now that we know reached this policies page, our end goal is to look into how to access Google API for mobile and desktop. But before we reach there, I will quickly go through all the items which are available here. Overview. This will eventually show all the informations. What is the need for access token? If you remember from the previous section, at the end of the previous section, we said that there is a website from RFC where you can go ahead and read about OAuth 2. Exactly the same. They will here also they are trying to explain about the OAuth 2 policies, but how the OAuth 2 is implemented in Google Console or Google Cloud. That's what they are explaining here. You can go ahead and see the different scenarios for web applications. What is the process like? This is the same thing that we discussed. Like we request and then we show the con, and then we have the authorization code, exchange token response is nothing but your access token, and then you make the call. And for installed applications, what is the procedure. So different procedures for different devices. So this is the limited input device, which mean the devices which does not have access to browsers, like a gaming console or video camera or printers. They do not have access to browsers, so you basically do everything and the browser will open on a separate device and you do the authorization. So these are the things that will be explained in this page. You can spend some time to understand everything. I will close this now. This is our end goal. We need to understand how the OAuth 2 works for desktop and mobile apps. What do they say? So let's go down here, go further down. So obtaining the token. So this is what we need. First, what they say is we need to generate a code verifier and a challenge, and this is not mandatory. Verifying, creating a code verifier and challenge is not mandatory. How do I know that this is not mandatory? Because it is mentioned below. We will get back to that shortly. But this step you can skip. It's not as of today. It is not mandatory. Maybe tomorrow they can make it mandatory one. But get down here. Step 2, send a request to Google OAuth 2 server. This is what we are looking at here. Sending a request from your client application to the server. We need to send the first request. So this is the URL for using which they are expecting us to send. Let me say, first let us write some names here. Client ID, and this one is client secret, and then we have an URL. Which is for request URL. Okay, and what else you have? For the request URL, there are set time parameters which are mandatory. So before that, just see what they are saying here. To this URL, you need to make a get request. How do I know that it is a get request? Because nowhere they mentioned it is a post request, and the following are query string parameters. So obviously I assume that it is a get request, and it is a query string parameter. What is a query string parameter? You could see from any of your requests here. Okay, you see anything after the question mark is your query string parameter. So the parameter name is auth user, value is 3. Parameter name is project, value is YT demo something, blah blah blah. So here client ID after the question mark, after come on, why are you doing this to me? Okay, after this auth we will be having something like this. After this auth we will be having something like question mark, client ID is equal to this client ID, and then client secret is equal to this client secret, and then it will go on forever. So this is what we need to do. And these things can be URL encoded. URL encoded means it's a percent encoded. So basically dollar symbol will be %5e, and at symbol will be %40, something like that. But you can always do that at a later stage. What else is here? You need to have a redirect URI. You need to provide this is required, mandatory. You need to provide a redirect URI. You need to provide a client ID, and then what else is there? You need to provide a response type. Just what is a response type? You see here they are mentioned clearly that the value is set to code for install. So the value default, it should always be code. And then the scope, which is a space limited list of scopes. As we have already seen before, scope means what are the things that the user can access. Now where can I find the scopes? It is here, OAuth 2.0 scopes. Let's go here and see. Basically these are all the URL endpoints. These are the scopes that we need to have access to. Okay, we now know the scope, and then these are all not mandatory. These are all recommended, challenge, state, blah 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 blah. We don't need to worry about it. After we are done with this request, if you make this request through your URL endpoint, what you will get? You will get some kind of user login page, and then you will log into the page. And after the login is done, if we go up, you are providing it with a redirect URI, right? This redirect URI should be a valid one. It could be in your local host, it could be in any of your server, wherever it is, because after the authorization is done, the Google server will send the next stage, which is your grant token or the access token, or what, not the access token, which is the temporary token, the grant token, to this redirect URI. You need to take that. So this is something like this. The grant info is what you will be receiving to your redirect URL. And after that, the next step is you need to again send this grant info to the user for exchanging it as an access token. So basically we have one URL which is the request URL, and we need one more URL which is the grant info URL, which is nothing but get down here, exchange the authorization code for refresh and access token. So this is the URL which you will use for step number 5. Let us store this also. Exchange URL, or you can call it as access token URL. This one requires client ID, client secret. Just see here. This is a post request because they have clearly said it is a post request. So when you make a post, and this is what content type is form URL encoded, which means the same this one, the same like this, like auth user is equal to 3, ampersand project is equal to blah blah blah. But instead of putting that in the query, you will be putting that in the body of the request, and it will go as it will be posted. So that's what X form URL encoded. It's an URL encoded, same like here, but instead of the query, it will be posted in your body. So you post it in your body, and this will return back to you your access token, something like this: access token, expire, refresh token. That's it. So this is the whole idea behind doing all these things. So now that we have a little bit idea about how it works, now what I will do, I will stop here, and then I will open up a C# console application, and then we will first make these calls. We will first make let's also copy the scopes here. That's why we opened it up. There are so many scopes here, but for these scopes you need to enable the APIs. You remember here in the enable the API services, we need to enable different APIs so that our scopes will be accessible. So those scopes will be, if we go down and search for something called everything is Google, right? Okay, go down, and this in the header side, search for Google. Okay, the Google, and it will be Google Cloud. Okay, sorry, it's not Google Cloud, it is Google OAuth 2. So these two are the by default access scope which we have provided before, which does not need any kind of APIs to be enabled. But for other items like Google Drive or YouTube, you need to enable the API. But if you remember, we did not enable any APIs. So that's it. Now what I will do, I will go ahead and open up a API tester. There are several API testers, API tester platforms available in the market. What I will use is, I will use Postman. This is a small desktop application. You can install this application, download and install it. But now the step, whatever we are going to see now, are purely optional. You don't even need to do them, because anyway we will do these steps again while we are building the application. But the reason why I am trying to do these steps now is to ensure that our application, our setup, whatever we have created, the credentials, the consent, with everything, before we begin the application, before we begin building the application, I just want to ensure that we are able to access it. I'm just trying to make sure that the APIs are working and fine without any issues. And then while building the application, if I face any issues, then I will know that the problem is not with the API, but with my application itself, and I can focus on fixing my application. That's the reason why I need to first test my API. There are so many applications available. Postman is there, and if you go for Postman alternatives, you can find something called Nightingale, or I don't remember the name. Yeah, Insomnia is there, Nightingale is there, and something from Telerik will also be there. So many things. It's totally up to you which you want to use. I will go ahead with Postman. Remember, as I said before, this is purely optional. We are only trying to test if your API is working or not. Postman itself comes with a very good OAuth 2 handler. So I will go to the authorization here. Like what I did is I just opened it up. When I selected it, it opened me the collection itself. In the collection, I'm setting up OAuth 2. I could see that there is some header prefix. These are all by default. Let it all be here. And if you go down, there is something called configure options, configure new access token. And here what I will do, I will give a name and I will say demo token, and authorization code, because we are not looking at passwords, credentials. These are all the different grant types. We will look into the grant types at a later point or in another video, but currently we know that let it be here. We go here, and we know that the response type is going to be code, which means it is an authorization code grant, and callback URL needs to be there. Auth URL, we already know the auth URL, which is, why my page is here, this is my request URL, is nothing but my auth URL. Okay, and then access token URL, this is my access token URL, and client ID. As I have said, this client ID I will delete it later, and your secret should be a secret, so please make sure you save your secret somewhere and not accessible to others. And after that, a scope is here. We already decided what are the scopes. See, remember the scopes are space delimited, multiple space delimited values. So it is what's said here as well, space delimited. So between two scopes you need to give what, a space, not comma delimited but space delimited. So there is a space between these two. I copy them all, minimize, put it here, and that's it. I did not give callback URL, which is nothing but my redirect URI, and scope is there, response type is there, and client ID is there. Why did I put secret if it is not required? Because we are merging two items here. We are merging in Postman. In Postman, we are merging this step number 5, sending the request, and we are also merging the grant info. That's the reason why we have secret and also the other things. But remember, redirect URI is very mandatory, very important. And what is a redirect URI? As I have said before, redirect URI is something where after the user enters his username password, at this point, in point number 3, after the user enters username password, the grant info will be returned back to the application to the redirect URI which we have specified. So redirect URI should be defined by us. If you have a server, you can define it, or if you have a local host server or a port which is listening, you can define that. We will define that while we are building the WPF application, but currently I will just give some dummy values, HTTP localhost, and I will say that it is running at 8800, which is not running anywhere, API auth. So this is not a valid one, this is not running anywhere. I just gave it because I will show you something. If I don't give this, let's say I start with something like google.com. If I don't give a valid callback URL and then I try to access a new token, requested URL was not found on the server. That's all we know. here you see, even the URL is wrong. This one I didn't put auth. After v2 I didn't put the h here, auth. So now if I go, redirect URI mismatch, because the redirect URI is wrong. That's the reason why it says redirect URI mismatch. If I give some random dummy values, then it should be working fine. So now it comes back with me. Why it's showing me in Arabic? Because I am located in Middle East. I am staying in Dubai. That's the reason why it's showing in Arabic. But in your case, when we are building up, in your case, you should be showing the geographical location where you are residing from. But when we are building the application, we have the option to change this. We have the option to change the language which we are looking at. But currently, you can also change the language from here. So that's it. What I will do now, I will try to use I don't remember the password of the applications that I created, but you if we go back to our API services, we know that we have only given this two email IDs. If I try to access it from any other email ID, it will not work. It will say that we are not authorized. So I will just try with this one. I don't remember the password, so I will just try to put something. I hope this is correct. Okay, Athray. So what it says, YT desktop demo app. Let's go back here. The name is coming from here. The YT desktop demo app wants to access your Google account. So this is what we are showing in the login page here. So here, instead of YT demo desktop app, your application name will be available. And also, if you would have remembered, I did not add the logo when it was asking me. It was when I was editing it, it was asking for the logo to be added. I did not add it. In case you added the logo, your logo will be visible here. Your account email is here. This will allow the application to. These are the access that scope that we have registered. If you remember here, we register only 2 scopes, which are nothing but getting the email, getting the profile. That's what it says. Associate with your personal info, see your personal info, including any personal info you have made publicly available, and see your primary Google address. That's it. So these are the very basic bare minimum things, not sensitive, nothing will be affected. So allow this, and after allow, authentication is complete. Now I will get the access token. Proceed. Access token is now generated. So this is my access token, and I have the expiry is here. Let me open it up here. What happens after we do this one? This is what we will receive. We get the access token, expiry, and token type, scope, refresh token now. So we have the scope only for this two. Using this access token, you can only access this two, and some ID token is there, blah blah blah. Access URL is there, client ID, secret is there, and most important, you have refresh token and access token. It expires in 3600 seconds. How long is it? 3600 seconds divided by 60 means 1 hour. Very good. So after 1 hour, the access token will be invalid, and refresh token will be sent back, and new access token will be automatically generated. You don't need to go to the user and ask him for his username, password. So use token. So now the token is added. If I now try to add a new request, let's say get name, and in the authorization I will say OAuth 2, and OAuth 2, there are several available tokens. I will take the demo token. So this is the token that I have. Save it, and now I need to call a URL from where I will be accessing something. Let us just go ahead and find out what is the URL that we need, that basically the API endpoint. So let me open up the browser. If you remembered something when we are setting up the consent page, and when we are looking into this scopes available, let me go to the next page. These two are not related to any IDs, like any API. So there will be API explorers available, but the problem is both of these two are not associated with any API. Like if you want to get some information about your Google Drive, yes, there will be a Google Drive API explorer from where you can fetch that. But the problem with the first two is that these two are not associated with any other APIs. So I will show that shortly, but before that, if you are using a Google Drive API or YouTube API, you want to explore that, go for Google API Explorer. Search for something and open it up. So this is your Google Explorer, and inside which you can open up any API that you want. For instance, if you are discussing about Drive API, let's search for Drive, and Drive version 3 API or YouTube API or whatever it is. It will give you all the URLs that are required. If you could see here, this is your base URL, and then after that, if you put slash and above, slash and about, then you will be getting the information about the user's drive system capabilities. You can do the same for getting the changes and making some changes and getting the comments or creating the files and all those things you can do, but you need to do some trial and error process. You need to play with them to understand how it is set up. But in our demo here in this video, we are not focusing on all these things. We are only focusing on the basic identity. So the basic identity, as I have said before, this one is not available or associated with any of the APIs. But what we can do, this is associated with OAuth 2. So this is the normal procedure. So I will just go ahead and where is my this one here? Copy this. But just don't try to use this one because it will not work. If I try to give this, it will just give me the same name. After the OAuth, remove it. So we are looking into user info, right? So after the OAuth, remove it and say OAuth 2 version 1 user info, like version 1 or version 2, whatever it is, send it and it will give you the response. So the response is the current logged in user is mouse events and where email is verified and name is this, given name is this, and picture is this, language is English, and this is the ID. So that's it. So we have now successfully verified our account using this one. This is how we will be doing it. In case we are trying to access Drive API or something else, we will be returned back with a denied error because we don't have those scopes associated with us. But for most of our application, for just a third party login, this is more than enough. You will be returned back with an ID and you will be returned back with a email ID. So both you can use to ensure that the user is a valid user who has logged in. At this point, everything is set. We are now done with setting up our Google Cloud, and then we also tested and we also checked how these things works. So the next step is we will start creating a WPF application, and then we will begin with implementing it. Let's go ahead. I'm going to create a WPF application now, and we will use .NET 6 for this. In your case, if you're using .NET framework, it's going to be the same. Well, not exactly. It's not going to be the same because eventually we will be using some ways to set up localhost listener within this application itself. So it might differ between .NET framework and .NET 6 applications. But in this video, we are only focusing on .NET 6. And this section of the video, we are going to only create the front end of the application. Before doing anything, let us first run our application to see that we are able to get the blank window. Okay, so the blank window is here, which means it is working. I'm going to create a WPF application now, and we will use .NET 6 for this. In your case, if you're using .NET framework, it's going to be the same. Well, not exactly. It's not going to be the same because eventually we will be using some ways to set up localhost listener within this application itself. So it might differ between .NET framework and .NET 6 applications. But in this video, we are only focusing on .NET 6. And this section of the video, we are going to only create the front end of the application. Before doing anything, let us first run our application to see that we are able to get the blank window. Okay, so the blank window is here, which means it is working. Let us first try to I will add some NuGet packages from Haley. Okay, well, what I did, I have this Icons Explorer extension which I have already installed. This will give me the resource dictionary that I need to add. But if you don't want to install this Icons Explorer, you can just take a look at here. Basically, I'm using the pack URI and from haley.wpf DLL and haley.wpf icons DLL. Both contains same resource dictionary name. So inside the dictionaries, I'm calling the Haley resource dictionary or Haley resource dictionary from two different DLL files and then merging them inside my application so that the resources inside becomes available to the WPF application here. And if you have any doubt with this one, please watch some of the previous videos in this channel because we have explained this a lot in several of our previous videos. We will first do one thing. We will just try to, since this is going to be a bare minimum UI, even though it's going to be a bare minimum UI, we will try to design some, add some colors and design it. We will first start with backend. So what I will do, will keep my properties open, and for this grid, before the grid, let me go back to the application itself, and we need a three, right? We need the three skeleton things. One is we need something called let's create a folder first. Views, model. Let's rename this as view model. View model. Inside the view, we will add one window. Let's call it as auth window. Let's add one more window. Home window. Basically, we have two windows, and finally, I will add one third window, but not now. Let me delete this main window. The moment I delete it, what happens? The application will not work because you could see that this app.xaml. If I go here, it is expecting the startup URI to be main window.xaml. Since we have already deleted it, we don't need to go with startup URI. Instead, we will go with startup event. So during startup, I'm going to call a method, and that method will be present inside this app.xaml. And here I will decide which window to open. I will decide whether to open auth window or whether to open home window, whatever it is. I will add a view model here, and apart from view model, I will also add one more folder, and let us call it as helpers, or let us call it as services. Let's add one class. We will have a global class there. So globals. Now this is not an ideal name, but we will just keep it as of now. This is going to be a static class so that all the properties that we put in here will be accessible by all the other methods. Or maybe in case if you want to use it, you can make it as a singleton class in such a way that but there is no point in making it as a singleton class because if you want to make use of some interfaces, because static classes cannot inherit or cannot implement interfaces. But when you want to implement interfaces, then no point in using a static class. We can make it as a singleton, but in our case, this is only for storing some data. So let it be there at present. And going back, what I will do, if you are not able to follow some of this, because we have already explained about all these static singleton classes in our previous videos. So that's the reason why I'm skipping them here. We'll go back to the auth window, and this is my auth window. Let me put a small text block here and say auth window. That's cool. And let's have text size is, sorry, font size is 45. Foreground is dark gray. No, just gray would do fine. Or maybe even I don't need gray, I will add some color here. Let's go to here, okay, something like this. And this test block, let us put it in the center of our screen. So horizontal alignment is center, vertical alignment is center, so it will be in the center of our screen. That's cool. And let us add one button in the bottom, button, and this button, let it have a height of 30, width of 150, and let it reside in the vertical alignment bottom, and let it also have a margin of 20, so it goes up a little bit. So there we go. So we have a button here, and this button, let's have the content as now this is not the final implementation, but what we are trying to do is foreground is equal to blue. We don't need blue, we need some cement color like this, and font sizes, okay, okay. What we need is we are going to now show this window, and when I click this button, we are going to open up another window like this home window, and then we are going to show the home window. Now what should happen here is when we click this button, this auth window should close and we should open up the main window. The reason why I'm doing this is WPF has this application set up as the main window or the current window. Even though there is no main window here, WPF applications itself will have a main window which should not be empty. When the main window is empty or closed, the application UI will not work. This we have explained before, but I will just show this here. The home window will be here, and we'll copy this contents and put it inside, and call it as home window. It doesn't sound nice, so let me remove the window. I'm home, and here please authorize me, and this one in the button will say sign logout. So we have these two things, and close save this one at present. Now we have a auth window, we have a home window. Now go back to the main application and let us try to check whether it works. So, obviously it will not work, but the idea is to show that why it won't work, and the reason it doesn't work. We'll call it inside a new method called run. Maybe if you could come up with a different variable name, that's better. Run. Okay, what my run is going to do now, on first instance I'm going to show the auth window. So a window, variable a window is equal to new auth window, cool, and variable h window is equal to new home window, that is also cool. Now as I said before, WPF application has this basic setup where when you do not assign any main window, it will automatically take the first window as your main window. That happens, and when this first window is closed, the remaining windows will not be shown. I will show that currently no prior main window, so this will be main window. Now let us first go ahead and show a main window dot show dialog, and when you show this main window, right, when you click this button, you need to set up this dialog result. So what we do at present, we are not dealing with the MVVM yet. So let's say click. When this button is clicked, I'm going to show this dialog result is equal to true. So only when this button is pressed, the dialog result will be true. But when you close this window, the dialog result will not be true. So when you press this button, the dialog result of this window is going to be true. And just in case if the dialog result is true, show dialog with is a boolean question mark, right? So okay, so auth result, if auth result dot has value and also auth result dot value, which means if I give like this, it is true, then h window dot show dialog. Now again, this one is main window result. Here I will say that okay, I will have a button click and say this dot dialog result is equal to true. What happens here is when the application is closed, we will directly close it, or else when the user signs out, we again need to show the login window. If window result dot has value and also value, we'll say now what we are going to do here is we are going to repeat this step again. We are going to again repeat this step. When the user logs in, we again need to open up the new window, and we again need to open up this new main window, and then again we need to do all those things. That's what we are trying to do here. When the user's dialog result is there, we again need to run, which means we again need to create a window, and again we need to create a new home window, and again we need to show the dialog and see how it goes. But this will not work, but that's what we are going to show now. And this is cool. We are here at least until this point now. Let's run this one and see how it goes. Okay, on first instance, before we do this, I need okay, let us go ahead and do this, and then we will discuss that later. I created a window, and then I created another window, and after that I'm showing this okay, I'm showing this. What's happening? Nope, I made some mistake. When a window dot show dialog, why did it show for twice? Now let's go back here. Did we make some mistake? Nope. Let's run the application again. See what happens. It's cool, but it is running twice. Why it's running twice? Let me remove these sections. Weird. It doesn't do anything now. But here, the moment a window dot show dialog, I should not be moving to the other line. So let me cut this H window and put it inside. Let's try this one now. It's very weird that it is happening. So what I will do, I will close. Now, most of the times when I face problems like this is because of Visual Studio. Let me close it, close bin, delete them both. Cool. I'm now not opening it up in 2019. You know, I found I found out the issue why it happens. It's very weird. I never faced this before, but this is the first time I'm facing it. We should not be using the method called run. I will show you why. I don't know, this is very weird. I just commented it out, but still my method is being called. So which means this method is called elsewhere, somewhere. That is very weird. So let us not use this method name called run, but instead we will say start authorization, and I will put it here. I will put it here. Let's try now. This should work fine, I believe. Perfect. Now it is not being called, so which means that we don't have that problem anymore. Let's try. I'm pretty much sure that I used to have methods called run in previous .NET framework versions. So in some of my applications it's still there, but I'm not sure what happened with .NET 6. Okay, now we have one window, and the moment we log in, which means that it is true, it should come back here and say that this has a value and it is true, and it should now try to open up a new window. As I was saying before, WPF has this concept of main window. So since the main window is already closed, this will not work. Even if I open up, you see, that's it. It just closes. Even though we try to give a show dialog, it will not work. I will explain how this is happening. We will go ahead. Before we start here, I will go to this watch and I will say application dot main current dot main window. So there is this application dot current dot main window. This main window is not some main window model or view that we have created, but this is a property which is present inside the application dot current. This is a static property. When this property is null, then no UI will be displayed. So when you can directly set some value to this main window, or you can initiate a new window, and whenever you initiate the first window, it will be assigned here. That's what will happen here. Just pay attention. The moment I move here, the main window has become auth window, and that's the reason why this is now available. And now let's go back here and blah 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 blah, and then we will log in. So now what happened, main window has become null. The reason is we already have closed this. When the main window is null, seriously, .NET, seriously. So I'm back. My intelligence is also working fine now. Let me put height and press. Yeah, it's working fine. So my height is going to be let's say 40 or 150. Let's run the application, and while debugging, we'll adjust those changes so that we can see them in live. Nope. Okay, here we go. And I will minimize. Okay. Now height, let it be a little bit more, maybe 200, and width is going to be 180. This is very small, so I will make the width as 250 and height as 300. And overall application height will also now change. Overall application height we will make it at 600, and with this, okay, 700 makes sense, but maybe we can make it at 700. What was the previous value? It was 800. Let's make it at 700 or 600, 500. That makes sense. And these are all widths here, and that's fine. Now for this border, we will add a corner radius of 20, and we also need to have some kind of a drop shadow effect, because now it looks like it is hanging over there. May not be much visible, but when you add that, you will find the difference. You can even find the difference by adding a border brush, like when you add a border brush of gray and border thickness of 1, you'll immediately see that there is some kind of shade here. But the problem is border brushes, it will be having a strike, it will show a striking difference. We don't need that border dot effect, drop shadow effect, and I have an effect here. Now depth is 0, so that it is evenly distributed on all sides. Blur radius is 8, so that it is a little bit more, or maybe blur radius is 10, and color itself should be dark gray, so that we have a very light effect here. So now that's that, we have this we have a nice effect there. I don't know how to express that, but that's fine. Now that we have a border, the next step would be to add one more element on the top. We will just add a small circle on the top and put some symbol there. I will add one more border now. What I will do, this border, I will add it here, border, and this border, I will have a background of let's say white again, and this one, instead of having the height like this will have a height of 70 to width of 70. Now you don't see it because it is in the middle, so instead of white, let's say white smoke, and you could see in the middle. Maybe we will put in green so that we can see the difference. Okay, and this one we need to have a corner radius of 35, so that it looks like a circle, and this circle horizontal alignment is center. Now we don't need to deal with horizontal alignment, but we need to deal with vertical alignment is top, and it should have a margin where the middle of the round should be placed on the center. So what I will do, margin is minus, margin usually will be, you can give 4 values, which is left, it will start like left, top, right, and bottom. If you give 2 values, it will be horizontal and vertical. So what I will do, I will give, if I give minus 35, it will go here. So which means left side it is minus, right side and top bottom it is minus. This, if it's not make sense, if you put 10 comma 50 or like 100 comma 50, the reason why the 100 doesn't work is the 100 is for horizontal, both left side it's 100, right side it's 100, doesn't work that way. So we just need only on the vertical side. So 0 comma minus 35, that makes sense here, and that's the reason why I didn't put minus 35 here, so that we don't have any problem there. And here I will again go back, I will add the same border effect to this one. You could notice that there is a nice border effect now. Now this green we can make it as white, so we have something here. And this one also doesn't need to be like this. We can change this color to maybe blue, like there could be a lot of blue. I think there is one blurry wood. Okay, something like this. We will come back to this later. We will come back to this later and change that, but currently let it be there. And what I will do here, I'm going to add image. So Haley has this image, and we have image button, plain image. So what I will do, I will go with the image, and this image, initially when you don't have an image, it will take the Haley logo, but I need to provide an image value here. I will press F12, and this one contains different properties. So what we need is, we have most important property called source property, where you will give the value, and you have hover, fill value, corner radius, and different values are there. So instead of this blurry wood here, the same blurry wood, we will take it here and say fill pearly wood. Okay, so fixed it there, and no, let's not use this. Let's say source is equal to, you can directly go ahead with static resource, and this will give you all the images, because these images are coming from really WPF icons. But in case the IntelliSense is not working for you and it is not showing for you, you can always go ahead with HW, image internal, and image. So internal will have only limited number of images, and HW image, and you have brand bootstrap images, font awesome images. What I will do, I will go ahead here and say font awesome icons search. Let's go to the font awesome icons, and you also have the bootstrap icons, which is very minimum, I believe somewhere around 1500. And instead of the search here, I will go for something called key. Okay, and if we need to take something, we can take this key, I believe. So there is this key, this one, FA solid FA key. So I think it is key somewhere. And the SVG, what is the name? No. This is a key, right? So go back here, and font awesome is equal to key. So we have key light, key skeleton, key solid. I don't know what is key skeleton, so I will give key, and the key has filled in now. And this one we will fill with the image. We will the fill is there, and we will fill with blue. No, that is too bad. So maybe blue, corn blue, cadet blue. What is this? Why do they have so many blues? Can you all not fix on one blue? Crimson. Crimson looks nice, even though it's so red. And what else do we need? We need to have some kind of a padding. So padding, so the difference between margin and padding is, margin is something that is outside the borders, like the whole component or element itself. And when you put margin to border, what happens is the whole outside will have that space. When you put padding, the contents inside will have that space. So padding, I will say 10, and what happened internally, this 10 is applied. Crimson looks good, but it's not too much highlighted, I don't know, but anyhow, let it be there. We can come back at the later stage to fix that. Now inside this one, because our main focus here is not building the UI, we said we are going to do it a very simple UI. And we can also do one thing to this image also. We can do a drop shadow effect in case if needed. I will just show how. Same case, same drop shadow effect. Why I do this, if you notice here, the moment I place, there is a nice effect you could see in the back. This one you don't even need this color, you can give black. Oh, that's very bad. Let's say yellow, again bad. Green, again very bad. Pale green. You know what, I'll just keep it as orange or red. and this one I will keep it at 4. Okay, let it be there. Even though that doesn't make any difference, I will keep it there and we'll come back and later fix it. So internally to this, so finally we have managed to have a border, and then we managed to have some kind of other items. And what we need to do out of all this, let's minimize this border, and then afterwards we need to have a grid. The background of the grid will be white, and this grid, what happened, why it's not working? Okay, I know why it's not working. The reason why it's not working, because a border can contain only a single child. You cannot have multiple child inside the border, and that is the reason why it's not working. So let us keep this all as one of our setup, and we'll go back. Since we are already inside a grid, on top of this one we will create one more border, and this border will carry the same background, height and everything as the previous one. You know what, it should not have a background, so that we display it like this. But it will carry only the height, width and corner radius like that. But why do we need a corner radius when you already don't have a border and background? The corner radius doesn't make any sense anymore. So inside which we will now add a grid. Again, why do I need it as a border? I can directly go ahead with a grid. So a grid, I will put some background color first to see where it is. Now the height is fine, and we'll have a margin of, let's say, -50 to see where it is. It doesn't work, right? So we will do one thing. We will take this one, this internal, because we need our grid to be relative to the border. We don't need this one to be happening here. So this border, we will take it completely outside, and it is going up, right? What we do, we put both of them together inside a grid. So now what happens, this border that we have is going inside a grid which has this height and width, and we put them inside. Cool. And then the second border where we were using this image also will go inside our border. So cool. This third border, the green, will also go inside our border. Cool. So now this one will go between these two borders. So everything is inside a grid, and the grid is already center, horizontal and vertical center. We have a height, and we have one element which is overall. You can't have like this, right? Overall back layout, and then you have key icon. Then finally you have your work region. So inside this work region, now I can give a margin of minus like 50, which will put it like this. But I don't need it on all sides. So what I will do, I need left side 0, top 50, right side 0, bottom 0. That's cool. This is what I need. The reason why I need this gap is because here I'm going to put my entry. So instead of 50, I will put 40. That makes more sense. And now let me remove the green color. So I know that my grid is here somewhere, but it is not visible anywhere. And I think the grid doesn't have a padding. Yeah, grid doesn't have a padding. Only the border has a padding. That is totally fine. So inside the grid, or maybe we can make it as a border and put a padding of 15. So this will avoid this one, and inside which I will put a grid. So now this is fine. If I make this background as green, now mine is within this item, and it also has a padding. Let's try to add some background here and say violet. That's perfect. So we have a padding of 15 on all sides, and I think our height should not be there, because when you define the height, it is going outside and the overflow is hidden. We should not have it like that. So let us remove the height, and width is fine because we need it. But what will happen if we remove the width? That is also fine, because the border is taking up the space of the grid, so it's fully occupying the grid. So that's also totally fine. You don't need to define the width, no need to define the height. It's taking everything up, and this green area is where your content is now going to be present. In that case, here I don't need to give 40, I will give 35, so it looks much better now. Now let's remove the violet and remove the green and save. Now at this point, we will start adding our entries. To begin with, I will add a small grid here with grid.column definitions, column definition. So here the width is going to be 80, and let's call text block text is equal to user. So I have a text here called user, and then after that I will have one more text box which will be on grid.column is equal to 1, and this is occupying the full space, which should not happen like that. And the reason is this grid is occupying the whole space. That's the reason why. So vertical alignment is top, so it will go there. So if you don't have the color, you will not know the difference. So what I will do, I will give you a background color, so you know the difference. So this is the height. The moment when you say vertical alignment is top, it goes up. So you don't have the setup there anymore. This is fine now for us. We have one item there, but we need everything to be stacked up. So instead of a grid, we will put them all inside a stack panel. And when you are doing it in a stack panel, it obviously will go to the vertical alignment top, so you don't need it anymore. So the grid is here. So you have the user, and then you have the user details. So you'll be able to enter something here. That is fine. And now what we do, we need to style this up. This grid will give a height of 40. Cool. And instead of the text block, we will try to now add a image. Go back here and search for an image, user or avatar. No, some user. Who is this? User bounty hunter, user nurse. Doesn't look nice. User type, but it looks like gender specific. User robot looks nice, or user ninja looks much better. We need to soon finalize. We are wasting time. We'll go with user crown, I believe. User crown. Okay, we'll go with user crown, and instead of this, I will go with HW image, and source is equal to, this time I will directly call static resource and crown, user crown solid, and close this. So I have the user crown solid. Remove the background color green, and this one I need to restrict the height by 30, and that's cool. And this I don't need the width to be like this. Let it be okay. If I do that, then the width will be equally split, so I will say the width is auto, so it's go to the left, and no, that is also not nice. So since our height is 30, I will say my width is 40. And this one here, instead of text block, I will go with plain text box. So the plain text box, what it gives me, column 1, it gives me the option to add a watermark, and I will say username, and it also gives me the option to have a corner radius of 10, That's too bad. 5. And what else? Margin is equal to 0. I'm sorry. Padding is equal to 0. I find this image itself is bigger than this. What's the reason? If I put my height as 50, what happens? Okay. So this height is restricted. That's the reason why it's not showing up. So let it be 40. And the height of the plain text box, I will give 30. So my icon height and this height remains the same. Do I need a border brush like this? I will just say the border brush is going to be dark gray, so it's very light. Okay, it's very mild now, and this is totally fine. So I will just copy. See, instead of repeating this setup, you can give a style and you can apply the to an item grid or item control, but I don't want to do that now. We will keep it simple at present, and I will go back again. And this one, instead of crown solid, go back here. This time what we need, a lock symbol. You know what? I think I'm making a mistake. The lock should be lock keyhole, lock hashtag, which looks nice. I think lock keyhole looks nice. Or lock A looks nice. A stands for authorization, lock A. I think this lock should be here and key should be here. That's how the way it should be. We are making a mistake. So this one, I will say key solid. What was that? Key solid. Key solid, and go above to this image, and instead of this key solid, we will have lock A. Where is my lock A? Lock solid. This is fine. So we need to have some kind of gap between them. So this one I will say margin. I will have only the vertical margin, not the horizontal one. Vertical margin I will have 5. So it goes little bit down. Now that is fine now. So now I have a username, and then this one I don't need a plain text box. What I need is a plain password box, and with watermark is password. Now here I can now type the password. I can see it. Username. I can see the password. This password itself, I can adjust the hash also. But before I adjust the hash, my text is looking very small. So let's go back here. Font size is equal to 14. That's better. So instead of adding the font size here, I will go back to my stack panel and say text block dot font size is 14. So it applies to everywhere. The font size gets applied everywhere. Okay, so now password. Okay, password is there, username is there. This looks fine and much better. So the next step, we need to add a button, and then we need to show the login. So we're already past so much time, but still we will spend a little more. And after this, why do we do time? After this one, I'm going to add a button. This button is going to be plain button, or maybe let's say combo button from WPF, and combo button where my image location will be on the left side. So, and it will be having a height of 35. So left side I will have an image, right side I will have something, and we will split it into two. What we will do, we will have an uniform grid here, uniform grid, where we will have two combo buttons, 1, 2, and between the combo buttons we need to have a margin of 2, 0. We will have the same margin here as well. So we have two buttons. One we will use for sign in, another we will use for sign up. I don't think we need a combo button. We are not going to show the images here. If needed, we can show image, but we are throwing images everywhere. It will look cumbersome. So we'll say plain button now. For plain button, we don't have this image location, so remove it up. Okay, it's a simple button. Now we'll have corner radius as 10. Cool. And background will be dark gray, and foreground will be white, and this one, instead of dark gray, I will say dark slate gray. And here I will copy everything. Usually you should not be copying, repeating yourself. You should go ahead with setting up a style, but we don't have the time, so I will just do it like this. And here, instead of dark slate, I will say dark con blue. Like, we need to have the same color everywhere, so we put some kind of a color there, right? What was the color? Crimson. We'll use the crimson here, so it will have a similar effect with the same icon. And hover color is not nice. We will fix that one. So hover dot background is equal to let's say con blue. So hover color should be con blue. Con blue is not nice, so we need to have some kind of a different blue. Cadet blue or Dodger blue. No, even this is not nice. Cadet blue. Oops, this is worse than the before. I'll just stick with medium shade blue since it is very bad. I will stick with Dodge blue. Okay, we will say the same here for my crimson as well. So okay, this looks okay. And now in the plain button, our content is going to be sign up. Here content is sign in. So usually this is to create an account. This is if you already have an account, you will log in. That's the core idea here. And here we will add a margin of 0, space 10. So it has a little bit, it goes a little bit down. Maybe it still need to go a little more down. So 20. It goes more down. This looks much better. And in case you forgot password, you need to give one more line, right? So we'll give linked text. And this linked, this 20 should not be 20 because it's very bad. So top is 20 and 0 and 5. But still, this is really bad. We have so much gap here. Let's try to put in the uniform grid, let's put a background of violet to see why. You see, it is occupying twice the space. So rows should be 1. And now this is fine. Perfect. So then in that case we will have 10 here. So in this 10, the linked text, I will have text is equal to forgot password. When you click this, obviously you should have that. And cursor, let it be hand. So the cursor is hand. And forget password. This looks much better at present. And now what we need more is in the bottom here, apart from all these, away from all this, we need to have, or maybe within the setup itself we can have. It's totally up to us. So what I will do, make this height as 350. And in the bottom, after all these things, I will add one more uniform grid. And let's put a background here to see what we are doing. So uniform grid usually does not show up. Well, let's add a height here, maybe 60. Okay, then let's add some kind of a margin where we have a vertical margin of 1500. That sounds much better. Since you're in a stack panel, you can go up and say the stack panel. This is my stack panel. I have a grid. 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. 5 items are inside, and I have this stack panel here, and the height of the border is here. Based upon this, we have the height and length. Okay, now let us go down. Let us try one more thing. For this grid, instead of the height, if I give auto, it takes up the whole item. So it should be 350. That's fine. Okay, now that we are here, we will go back to the uniform grid. Add 3 icons here, same like this round. We'll add 3 icons, one for Google, one for GitHub, or whatever it is, Facebook, something, so that we know that we have 3 logins there. I will add with the border first. This border I will have a background of blue, and this one height is 60, so width I will keep 60. So now we have something here, inside which I will add the image whose source will be, instead of static resource, I will say image, and brand is Google, brand Google, Google as Google Chrome. So many things are there. Let's start with Google first and see how it is. It just gives me a G. Is there some other Google? We have Google Cloud. Nope, not that. Google Keep. Nope, not that as well. Google Chrome. No, we will just stick with simple Google logo there. That's fine. Then remove the backend from here. Remove the backend green from here, and this looks better. And in the border, let us put border brush of gray, and a border thickness of 1, and we'll add a padding of 5, and corner radius of 10. So we have something like this. So the height is 60. We can make it as 50 and 50 here, and make this padding as 3. So we have something like this. This looks okay. And for Google, we can make the fill color as green, maybe. No, but what is the color of Google now? They have different colors, right? So we will say cadet cornflower blue, or maybe Dodger blue. I'm not happy with both the blues, but let's go back to Google and see what color they have. They have a blue, which is something like this, and then they have. Why do you guys have to go with multiple colors? Okay, we will just stick with one color, and we will add one more same like this. We will add copy 1, 2, and the uniform grid row should be 1. So we have 3 items, and then this itself, since we have the margin, we are not seeing it up here. So if we put the width is equal to auto, or let's say if we put margin, if we put 15 everywhere, it will be a little bit, because on all sides we are adding 15. So just like here, we will add a GitHub color. We know that it is black, so I can go with black, and we can add Facebook here. Facebook F alone is enough, I believe. Facebook F, and the color we know for Facebook is blue. There is no difference. So now we have got, I think instead of Dodger blue, I will go with orange or maybe yellow. Let me take one more. I will go with red. Oops. These are all too much bright. So what I will do after this image, I'm just trying to see if I could do something. We cannot have multiple children inside this. So no problem. Let's see if we can add opacity of 70%. Our opacity should be in 0.7. Okay, so there is no more. Okay, I will add the opacity for this image and opacity for this one. Let's make all the opacity 0.5, 0.5, or 0.76 is fine. 0.7 is fine. 0.7, 0.7. When you hover the mouse, let us add some kind of background color. Say hover fill is equal to violet, or maybe something different. Tomato. I will do one thing. I will just go up and create a style in this uniform grid. Uniform grid dot style resources, not style, uniform grid dot resources. I will add some resources to this uniform grid, and I will add a resource dictionary, and we'll add a style for target type. What is the type? HW image, and we don't need a key, but what we will say, setter property opacity value is 0.7, and style dot triggers, trigger property mouse over. Whenever the mouse over is true, I'm going to say my opacity value is 1.0. That's cool. So I can remove this opacity from here, and here. So what happens when I move my mouse? The opacity changes. I can also add one more thing. Before the trigger, I will add a setter property cursor value is hand. So have a cursor here, and whenever you move, the colors are changing. So that's it. We can add more space here. So the margin we can have 15 here and 65 on maybe 50. That's too much. 40. That's much better. So that's it. Let's see, we have a username, password, sign up, sign in, forget password. Then we have different ones. But we don't need like this. Who is going to maximize our screen? We should remove the maximize capacity. or the maximize ability. So let's go here. Maximize hide maximize button is true. Hide minimize button is true. The moment I do this, both are gone. So I can maximize, but still I have to maximize only by moving here. There is no specific button for maximize. Now that's cooler. Now this is fine so far. What we do now, when we click this button, we need to authenticate through the Google API. That's the next step. As I said at the beginning, our authentication should be done externally, which means we should not be sending our APIs. We should not be storing the credentials within our application. So what I will do, we are not going to mimic an external. We are not going to set up an external server, but instead we will mimic that by creating a new project and call it as let's call it .NET. What do we want here? We need some kind of a class library, and this class library we will call as let's say, what can we say, auth helper or auth service. So we have something called auth service, and remember this auth service, even though it is now going to be in the same project, in your production application you should be running in a different server, because this is the location where you will be handling storing your credentials, you will be storing your client secrets, and this auth service will take care of communicating with Google API. So that's very important. That is also only until you get the access token. After the access token is received, your application can directly communicate with the API. So let's rename this one and call it as token service. So we have a method called token service, and we will add project reference to our service. Now again, the reason for keeping it as a separate project is just we are mimicking it. In real production application, this should be coming from a different service. Public token service. Okay, now that we have got there, and from our application, let us add one view model. Add a new class, AuthVM. And this AuthVM should need all kind of notify property change and everything, but since we have already added Haley WPF resource dictionary and Haley libraries as references, it already contains something called base VM. This base VM comes with all the notify property change and all those classes. We don't have to worry about that now. AuthVM. This is my AuthVM. Let's add a command here. Before we add a command, using system.windows.input drop I command Google login, and this one will be giving me new delegate command with calling a method called Google login. There we go. So when this command is called, it will call this delegate command with this method, and here let us say console dot, no, it's not a console application, right? So debug dot write line Google login call. Just for a demo, we will remove this one later. So the AuthVM should be part of this auth window. We are not using dependency injection at this point. So what we do, we can directly assign this view model. Whenever this view is called, this dot view model data context is equal to new auth window auth VM. Remember, each time you call this, it is going to call a new auth VM. It's not the old auth VM, it will be a new auth VM. So now we know that when the application is called, the data context is assigned as an auth VM. So from auth VM, you can go ahead and copy the method. And since this grid is taking this auth VM as the data context, so everything will be transferred or shared down, which means for this button here, the image that we have here, we cannot use image. You know the reason why image does not come with command. We need something called a image button now. So let's go with image button. An image button does not have all these nice features. So there is no fill, there is no source. So close them both. But instead it has something called icon.default is equal to Haley image, brand is Google, and icon.default color is red. Let's save this, turn it off and turn it on. Okay, now that we got it, and this one is image button, right? So we need to go here and set image button, and we need to do the same for the other items also, because image does not have a command, it can only have a click, and we need black here, and a brand GitHub there, blue here, Facebook there, save. Okay, now that we know this button is now it's image button, it comes with a command, and command is what? Command Google login binding to command Google login. So we know that when this is pressed, we are going to call the command Google login. Let us test it so that we know that auth VM is associated with the auth window. So when you press this button, you should be seeing this debug.writeline Google login called. So let's open the output. Just pay attention here in the bottom, or maybe I will clear them all. Google login called. So basically when we click this, the debug, we are writing into the debug line. That's fine. So which means that the command is called and it is working. That's fine. So what we need to do, first step, instead of all this, we need to now authenticate using Google. So we already know the steps that we need to do. The first step is, let's open up the Notepad. Okay, when we restarted this PC, we lost everything. When I restarted to remove the glitch from Visual Studio, I lost the Notepad. So no problem. We can get it back from Postman because we know that we saved it in Postman. There we go. The authorization, the auth URL, token URL, client ID, client secret, everything is here. Perfect. Now we should not be storing this information here, so we can go ahead and keep it with the token service. Just assume that the token service is running in a different server. What we have here, client ID, it comes by itself, client ID, client secret, and then you have auth URL, then you have one more token URL, What else is pending? Client ID, auth URL, token URL, and come down. Scope is there, but that's okay. Scope is not. Let us not add the scope from here. Redirect URL. Redirect URL. Okay. Now this one we don't need redirect URL as well. The client ID is important. We will say client ID. Just copy it up. Client ID. Oops. Is it because? Okay, because of that. Client secrets. Client secret. An authorization URL. We already know what it is. Okay, there we go. We have now added all the required basic requirements. And first step is we need to make a public string which should give me a URL get request URL. So this is my first step. I need to get the request URL which should return me some value to the user, and the user will be doing this. Now let us open up the Google authentication that we have here. To send a request to the URL, what are the things required? You need client ID with this particular parameter name called client ID, and then you have something called redirect URI, and then you have response type, scope. These are all mandatory ones. So what we do, let us build these things. We can build this and we can fetch the URL. How do we build this? The Haley utils, we have not yet added Haley here, so I will go ahead and add Haley REST. Haley REST. Yes. Okay. The Haley contains something called Haley utils. Using Haley.utils and using Haley.rest. There's something called netutils dot. Haley contains something called in the model side. If you add eventually, what we need to do here. Eventually, what you need to do here is something like this. You need to build some query like this, where you will put scope, the base URL. We already know what it is, followed by a question mark, and then all the parameters with their respective values. We need to have scope followed by the values, and then we need to have the response type followed by that. So we need to have all these things one by one. After we have that, we need to provide it. So but the thing is, we can either build it by using a string builder, using getting each of the items and URL, encoding them. Haley itself contains, and the netutils itself contains URL encoder. You have single encode, you have encode relaxed, both items are there. But instead of doing that, what I will do, I will have something called query param list. So query params, there are 3 overloads. What are the overloads? It takes name value collection or I enumerable of I query param. So let's start with this list of I query param, list of query param, to know list param, list.add. So first query param is I have a key called client underscore ID redirect underscore URI. Client underscore ID and the value is client ID. Cool. Redirect underscore URI. Is it correct? So here I will say redirect URI is HTTP localhost 8500 auth API gauth, something like that, but we don't have it yet, but we are just adding it there. And then we have response type, which should be code, default, and scope. Response type should be, the value should always be code. And then we have one more thing called scope. And the scope, we know that it is a comma delimiter, space delimiter one. You can give everything, including the Google APIs, auth, user info, email profile, or you can just give email space profile. Both are accepted. So scope I will give email space profile. How do I know that email space profile will work? Because in the example itself they have given email space profile. If it is drive related one, I will directly go ahead. What I usually do is whenever we have here the HTTPS Google APIs, until this auth I will leave it, and whatever comes later, userinfo.email or userinfo.profile, those things I give them with space. So the endpoints, the final endpoints I give there. So eventually it will work. In case of failure, it doesn't work, I will give the full URL for the scope. But currently in our case, these two are more than enough to add as a scope. And after that, client ID, redirect URI. What else is needed? Scope is there, response type is there, redirect is there, client ID is there. That's it. We don't need anything else at present. And we remove the last one and paste this into the query param list. Why am I doing this? Because query params has a method called get concatenated string. Here basically we will be able to get a string which will merge with equal to symbol and then ampersand symbol, and it will sort it as well, and it will again URL encode it as well. So this is what we need. Variable response or request URL is equal to this. If I don't want to do that, I can go ahead like this and directly call it. So I don't even need to create a new parameter there. So that's it. So I got mine, and even I can do something better. I can just say return query parameters. So no need to store one more variable. We are directly giving the URL here. Let's go back to our Auth VM and say using auth service and what we have there, token service data. You need a new token service. We will do one thing. This token service, instead of calling it as a method, we will call it as a singleton service. Or we don't even need singleton. We can directly go ahead and make it as a static class. Static. So in that case, everything will be static. There is no more this one. And this one will also be static string, static string, static string, static token. So go to my auth. I will say token service.get request URL. variable rec URL is. So at this point I should be having an URL. So we are just going to see whether the URL is valid or not. Debug dot write line rec URL. Let's test it. Okay, our application is here and everything is fine. This colors are too dark, you know, like it is taking the focus out of our what is this say social sign in. It is taking the focus out, but still okay. Let's give this and go to here. Let's clear up. We already saw it's there, but anyhow. So this is it. We have the client ID, apps, and redirect URL. You could see that it is URL encoded, and response type is as scope is equal to email and profile is there. Now this is working, but one thing is we only got the query. We need one more thing, which is nothing but my auth URL should also be there, right? So the request URL should be full. It should not be half. So auth URL plus I have a question mark symbol plus this. Let's try now. So it should give me, along with everything, it should give me the value. Go to the output, clear it up. There we go. I got the link. So now this link, I can go here, open it up, paste it in the URL, enter. This is opening up. It's saying that choose an account to continue to Y desktop demo app. So which means it's already working. But there is one more problem. I don't need to use my browser here. I don't need to open up my browser, or I don't need to open up my other place. But that's okay. But what I'm going to do, there are two things here. One, if you just want to open up the URL in your default browser, you have no idea whether this user has any browser or not. You can directly open the link and it will open up in the default browser. But in case you want to do it yourself, you can always go with something called web browser 2, WebView 2. I'm sorry, it's WebView 2. WebView 2 is the latest Edge browser which you can add into your WPF application. But we're not going to focus on that in this video. I'm just giving you a hint of what you can do. So in that case, what will happen? You will be displaying another dialog box within your application itself. So it will be kind of like a tool window. Instead of opening up in the browser, you will be opening up a tool window which will look very nice. You will not be living outside your application. You will have the feeling that you are still within your app. But in our case, now we will be opening it up externally. Usually this URL, if string dot is null or white space, rec URL, if it is null or white space, return. And we need to open up a process. So open the process. If I'm not wrong, you cannot directly call a process with this URL. You need to because with the latest .NET 6 or something, you need to start a process with startup arguments. Usually what we do, we will have the process P and new process and process dot start, and you can put the URL here. It used to work before. What it says? It says that you cannot do that. So that's okay. So process start info, P info is equal to new process start info with request URL, and then process dot start this request info. It used to work before. You give an URL, and then when you start the process, whatever is the default application, it will start from there. But with .NET Core and then the latest versions, it is not working. It throws an exception. We'll just see whether the exception is still being thrown up. See, there is an error because you are not able to start this process. To do that, what you need to do along with this process info, you need to use shell execute is equal to true. So this keyword that you need to use, I think only that keyword is enough. When this property is enough, let's try. Okay, there we go, it works. Now that we managed to get here, I will close this. I will also close this. Why did I close? Because at this point, even if you log in, it will not work because you don't have the URI, the redirect URI working. I will show you how. I have a lot of emails associated here, but we know that only this front-end frenzy and mouse events are associated. I will go to mouse events. Anyhow, even after the authorization is successful, this will still go into the local host and say that it is not present, unable to connect because the local host is not present. That's totally fine now. So now that is our next step. Before even we do anything, we need to open up we need to set up a listener which will listen to this 8500 or whatever it is, and it will be receiving this information from that. So let us do one thing. To do that, until this point, if it is clear, then we will go ahead with the next step, which will be a little bit tricky now, because we are going to create web API which will be hosted in our WPF application, which is something new. When I say new, not new to the industry itself, people have already done it before, but it is something new that we are going to do now. We are going to implement a web API and we are going to host it in our WPF application. To do that, there is one library that we need to add, which is the Owin, Microsoft AspNetCore Owin. Not this one, Microsoft.NET ASP. Since we are using .NET 6, we need ASP.NET Core Owin. Let's search for that. This one, the one with this 46 million downloads, we will install it. So we are using Microsoft AspNetCore Owin. Depending on the framework that you are using, if you are using .NET framework, you will be using a different one. Now there is a problem. What it says, this is not compatible with .NET 6. Okay, because this is compatible only with .NET 7. So let's go down and choose 6.1.5. Obviously, it should be compatible with our .NET 6 version. Okay, it is compatible and we have already added it here. So now the ASP.NET Core Owin is added. Now the next step is, first thing, we need to create a controller. If you have some experience in ASP.NET Web API development, you will know that the folder name should be controller, because whatever you place in there should also have a suffix controller, so that the application will be able to automatically link or find those web API controllers and make the bindings. So I will add one controller here, but now usually there is a trick that I do. Whenever I don't know what to do here, I always create because this is a WPF application and we don't have the intelligence, we don't know what we are going to create. So what I always do, I will create a new web API project, ASP.NET Core Web API. This one you can delete it shortly, it's not needed. Use controllers, uncheck to use minimal API, configure, nothing. Okay. Here I will go ahead, it's not controller, it's controllers. Here I will go ahead and add, because when I go here now, I have the option to add a new controller. I will add a new controller. and this will be an API controller with read write actions. Add, let's give it a name, and this name will be GAuth controller. So the controller is added. Now what I can do, I can copy the whole and move it here. Yep, that's it. I don't need it anymore. I can unload the project, or I can delete it. But here if I come, I have the whole setup here. Now what is missing? It is missing IEnumerable, so I think it is in using system dot collections, and what else is missing? Non-generic type IEnumerable cannot be used with type arguments. So here it's not only in collections, it's saying that type arguments cannot be used. Type arguments means it is generic, so system.collections.generic. Perfect. Now that we have it here, we have the controller. Now before we proceed with anything, before we proceed with any other step, the first we need to do is we need to host this auth controller and see whether it will work or not. Now go back to the token service and see what is the local host we have. We have API followed by GAuth, which means API followed by the name of the controller, which is nothing but GAuth. So we have now set it up. All we need to do is we need to ensure that we are running this one in a local host with 8500 port. Once we do that, then we will be able to make the post or make the put or make whatever commands we want. So to do that, first we already have added our package Owin, which means that it will work fine. Now there are two steps. Let me reload it just to show you how a web API works. In a web API, when we go there, we have a very important thing called as here. Okay, we have an important thing called web host builder. So basically here you are building directly a web application. When you open up the web application, it will be coming from something called as, I'm pressing F12, iWebhost or iHost. So you need a host and you need to be running your host. That's the most important thing. If you see here, you are building a kind of a builder, and the builder will build a web application. So if I go to this build, it is going to give me a web application, which is again a host. So this is the core idea behind ASP.NET. So you will be preparing a host, and the host will use authorization. It will map controllers. When you say map controllers, it will automatically find the folder controllers, and it will take the GAuth or weather forecast, and it will map directly to your API. That's what it does. So basically you are building a web host, and then you are assigning it some functions, and finally you will be running the web host. When you run this web host, it will take up a specific or the current thread, and it will start running a host web API, which will be listening into the port whichever we have defined. For a full-fledged API application, the information will come from app settings. So in the app settings, you can specify which is the default port, and all those information you can give. If not, it will take the default ones which was assigned to it in the launch. I'm sorry, not in the app settings, it's in the launch settings. You could see in the launch settings that it will be running in a port called 509 or 1958. In case if you are running it in the IAS Express, it will be running here. If you are running it in a different place, it will be running in 599 in the development environment. So those are the things which are specified here. But we don't have the luxury in our WPF application. The reason is, when I edit the project file, I will see that the project itself is taking from .NET SDK, Microsoft .NET or SDK. If I see the same for web application, it is taking from SDK.web, which means the moment I change this .SDK to web, this will turn into a web application and it will no longer work as a WPF application. You could see that here we have the target framework and we are using WPF and these things are here, but the same is not applicable to your web application now. The framework is fine, but it is not using WPF, it is using the web SDK. So that's the difference. To avoid these shortcomings, what we do is to overcome these shortcomings, what we do, we are already adding the dependency package called AspNetCore Owin now. So with this Owin, now we are going to build our own web host builder and we are going to run this. Where can we run this? We will do it in the global service. The global service, we will say, we will call this service as public static initiate listener. Let's say initiate listener. And as I said before, when the listener is initiated, it will take up the thread where it is running. So it is always safer to run it in an asynchronous mode so that it will be running in a different thread. How do we start this now? So first thing, it is present in using Microsoft ASP.NET Core.hosting. Where it is? Hosting. What is present? The builder is present in ASP.NET hosting. The host is equal to new web host builder. Use Kestrel. Kestrel is nothing but your server, I believe. If you go to F12, it will give you the reason for what it is. It is used as a server to be used by the web host. So Kestrel. So use Kestrel and then use URL. Here you will specify the URL which you need. I will say use localhost 8500. Remember, when you are trying to run this Google Auth 2 times, this first application, whichever opens up, will lock this port. Or if this port is used by some other process, application will not even start the host. So currently we are using it as a temporary resort, but when you are building it in a production application, try to find a way to get the next available port and then open this port here. This one should not be coming from here, but it should be coming from your service. Your service should find the next available port and then it should append it here, and it should also return the port number to you so that you will be able to set it up inside your web host builder. Currently we will keep it simple, use that, and we have something called use startup. Startup is where, if I go into my program, so we are building the application. Startup is where you will define to use authorization, map controllers, and all this information. We will get there shortly, but before that, use Kestrels and then we were building it, right? So final method should be build method. So we will do the same here. Build. So when this is built, you will be returned back with the iWeb host. And get down. Let us store this somewhere else, like iWeb host. We'll say host, and we will call this one here. And after the build is successful, why it's not working? It's a static method host. What says host? Let us not do it in async method, because async also there is no guarantee that it will start a new thread. Sometimes async will also run in the same thread. We don't want to risk it, so we'll say task.run. So we know that it will be started in a new thread, and we will say host.run. So the reason why we do this like this, because the active thread will be blocked by the host. The host will be running in the active thread. So if you are running it in your direct without this task, or if you're not running it in a separate thread, your application itself will not work. It will feel like your application is hung up. And now this looks totally fine. You can initiate the listener, but something else is missing, which is map controllers. Like, can we not use map controllers here? No. Can we not use routing here? No. That's the problem. When we go into this program, here when you build it, you will be returned back with an app, and that app is where you are when the build is successful, you are returning with an app. The app is where you are using the authorization and map controllers and everything. If we go back here, the host dot map controllers is not available. Hope dot use routing not available, because this is completely different. Here when you are building, you are using some kind of latest ones, which is the web application directly, but we don't have the luxury in Owin. The web application is coming from iHost, but the concept remains the same, but we are using web host because web host is the only one which is exposed to us via this package ASP.NET Core Owin. So since we don't have that iHost, but we only have the web host, we don't have that luxury of calling directly like use mapping or use author map controllers. So whatever we have here, like use authorization map controllers, we don't have that luxury in this one. So because of which we will not be able to map the controllers, and even though your host and server is running, it will not be connected to your controller. So you need to add map controllers. To do that, use startup use startup with, you need to provide a startup class here, and let's call this class as startup args, and I will add a class here itself, internal class startup args. There we go. But it says something, use startup web host builder is a method which is not valid in the given context. What it says is, it is expecting when you use this use startup. Did you notice something? Let me remove this one. When you use this, it is expecting some kind of function which should be able to take up this value. So let us put it here, and this public startup itself, the class that we are building it up, should be able to configure. Now at this point I have two methods that needs to be added, but how do I know these two methods here is not from this web application, but some of the older ASP.NET Core contains this configure services methods. Even you can find them here when you run it up using this use startup. When you press F12, you can go inside and find that if you read that there will be two methods. One is a configure service method, which will be taking in an app context, and then it will also be taking in an iService collection. So there is a method which will be called by the startup. So that one we don't have a proper documentation, but we know that is how the startup is going to be used. Now that we if you already have prior experience with older ASP.NET Core, you would have already seen this one, the configure services methods being used. It was used in ASP.NET Core 3.1 and 3, but with .NET 6 everything got simpler, so it is not shown anymore. But that's not the case for us. For us, we are using ASP.NET Core Owin, which is still an ASP.NET Core. So it is still following some of the old practices of ASP.NET Core, and that's the reason why we are not able to find a reference from this .NET 6 application. So what I will do, I will add it. In case you want to understand how this is being done, you can add one more project, and this time instead of web API, .NET 6, you can go with the .NET Core 3.1 and see how it is built. but I will suggest directly taking this up because there are only two methods involved. I will do one thing just to avoid confusion. I will add this project directly. Web API and ASP.NET Web API, and this time we will go, instead of .NET 6, we will go for .NET 3.1, which is out of support anyhow. It's no longer supported. I go to the program. I have the host builder where we will blah 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 blah. We will do the host, and this is what I was talking about. We will use the startup with some class, which is this one, and this contains forget about this setup, but it contains two important methods. One is this configuration methods, and other is this configure method. These two methods are very important. We will copy this, or if you don't want to copy, you can write it yourself. But if you would notice, these two method names are very important because those methods will be called. That's how we know. You can also find it by using the use startup inside and find that those are the two methods getting called: configure services and configure services and configure. So this is how your startup should be. Let's copy it and clean it up. And this one, service collection, is fine because whenever you add a service collection, you are adding the controllers, which means you are giving the service the option to add controllers. And then remove this one, and here we don't need all these things, but what we need is, we need routing, we don't need authorization. You need the application to be using the endpoints, and endpoints basically means you will map the controllers. That's it. These are the two things that you need. And again, this web host environment is an optional method. You don't need it as well. You can just leave it as is. So that's it. So this is the reason why we need this one. We can unload this project, and we can unload this project as well. Again, I repeat, these methods that we take from the startup arguments are very old school. It is from, it's not very old school, maybe 5 or 6 years old. It is coming from .NET Core, which is not supported anymore. Now we are only using .NET 6, but the problem is we need to use Owin, and Owin supports .NET Core. That's why we are using it up. And remember, this is just to ensure that your WPF application is able to host a local host listener by itself. But in case you want to build a separate API, that is again going to be very good. But the problem will be, if you have a separate API, how your WPF application will again communicate. Like, it should be doing a long polling, or it should somehow know that the response is received by your API. So there are a lot of things in play here, but in my experience, this is the easiest solution and the cleanest solution that I found. Yeah, it might look difficult, but if you pay attention, there is only one step. You are setting up a listener here and using this startup. That's it. This is a simple step, and when you are done with this one, when you initiate the listener, the host will be started at this point, this port and this local host with all this setup. Now at this point, we are not going to do anything. We will first initiate this listener, and we will call this 8500 and see whether we are able to get this get method with this values 1 and 2. We will just see that. So for this to happen, inside our application, before anything is started, before the authorization, we will start our listener. As I said before, listener should be, the port should be started only once. So we don't do that outside, but we will do it here. Globals dot initiate listener. That's it. This one will initiate the listener, and we will do something else. We will wait for a second. So we cannot use task.wait in this location. I believe task.delay. It's an awaitable. So what we will do, async void initialize app, and copy everything, post them inside initialize app. await let's wait for 1500 milliseconds, which means 1000 seconds. Let's try this. Before we try this, open up here and let's say localhost 8500 API GAuth. It should be failing for me. That's totally fine. That's what I need. And now let's run the application. Okay, our application is here. Now let us go back here and run this to see whether we are receiving anything. Okay, we received values 1 and 2, which means when the application is running, along with the application in the backend, our local host is also running. Let's go back to our GAuth controller, and this is the get method, right? Because we didn't give anything else. If you gave a route, it will work accordingly. If you don't give a route, everything will come into this location. First and foremost thing here, what do we have with this controller base? Press F12 and see what do you have with this controller base. And controller base contains something called request. It should be there. Request is there. Okay, from controller base we have request. Rec is equal to, or maybe variable rec is equal to request dot query dot toString. So this will give me the query, whatever is coming up. I saved it. Now what I will do, I will go here, run this application. It opens up here, login with mouse events, and did you notice the moment it is logged in, it immediately came back to my local host because it already called that URL. And from this query I have 4 items in the query. What are the 4 items? I got auth user, I got scope, I got code. Code is something which I need. If you pay attention, code is something which I need. So we will close this here. There are 2 ways how we can do this. Before that, let's go back to our API reference. I'm sorry. Here, what is the response that we are expecting from this? After the user consent is provided, we will be returned back with this code, and then not here. In case of a successful grant, it doesn't say anything about it. Now, we will be returned back with code, which is what we need. The code is nothing but your grant. So we know that it is coming from query. So from query, give me code, and this is what I need. So once this code is written, I don't need to return back anything because that was only for testing. I will put a void there, or maybe I can return a string and send a message saying please close this window and return back to your application. So I will say this after I receive this code. Once the code is returned, now there should be a way to send this code back to my auth.vm. I should be able to send this to auth.vm. There are so many ways that I could think of, but the main problem is the auth.vm will be initiated every time when we log out and log in. So we should have some kind of an event based mechanism which should be sending the message here and there. The most simplest way is registering yourself. Like we need to register our auth.vm here, and once this registration is done, and our global host will then call this and invoke the registered method. So that is one option. And another option is we can set up for a event service. Instead of going to an event bus or something, I will go with a very simple case of a dictionary. I will say prop dictionary of string, and I'm going to register a method which is an action which takes in a string, and say what do you call this, Google auth calls. Okay, this one, instead of public, let it be static internal, and here instead of this, let's put new string like this, and a public static bool register for Google. Register a method here, a callback method, Google callbacks. Register a method here, and with a string, with a key, string key. And what we do, if Google callbacks dot contains key, does not contain key, Google callbacks dot add key and null. Google callbacks this key is equal to callback. Add or replace. Return true. We don't need return at all. When we are always going to return same value, there is no pointing returning at all. So register for Google. Now what we know is instead of Google callbacks, we can say that callbacks, register callbacks. Why do we say like that? Because today we can use for Google key could be Google, and whenever Google authorization is successful, we can make the callback, which will go to the particular method that we are using. Whenever GitHub is successful, we can go to a different location. So from this controller, we say in the globals public static void make call for this one with string value. So just make a call. So what I will do, callbacks dot if callbacks dot contains key, then callbacks of key dot invoke value. And now there is a possibility this could fail, so let's just put it inside this method. Again, this could again fail, because if you try to invoke thread exception could happen. We will see if that happens, and if it happens, we will fix it. Now that's it. From here we will make a call, globals dot make call. Whoever is registered for Google, just give them this code. Whoever has registered for Google, give this code. Maybe no one else has registered for Google and it will not even happen, but if some case someone has registered, they will be receiving it. And at any given point of time, for one key, only one method is allowed. So here, whenever you are initiating this, globals dot register callback Google, like for Google, you can have like for Google you can make a registration, and for different ones you can make a different registration, but eventually this is a method which will take handle Google auth with a code. So just basically we are using delegate here, this dot handle Google Auth. That's it. So what we do, whenever we initiate a new auth VM, we are registering it back. So this one will be called here new code is provided, a grant type. So at this point, when you receive the grant, the next step that you need to do is you need to use this grant or the code and exchange it. So go to, but before we move any step further, we will just put a checkpoint here, go back to the call. We don't need anything else now. Let's remove everything else. Maybe later for auth, you have the gauth, right? Instead of gauth controller, you can call directly as auth controller, and in this get, you can have a route which says Google. So API /auth/ Google. Then in that case, you need to change it here, API /auth/ Google. So that's what you will have here, API /auth/ Google. When the route to Google is called, you will be doing it. For GitHub, maybe you will have something like GitHub, and this one get Google, get GitHub, and for this one it could be a different string that might be coming up, but you don't know that yet. So this is just an idea how we can take it forward. Currently for Google, we are using one authentication. Whenever the authentication comes in, we are going to make a call with the code, and then we are returning it back there. An application will receive it here at this location. Let's try this. Okay, here we go, and open up Google, and let's do the signing. After the signing is done, it will be sending you the response there, which it already did. The response is what? The code is provided here, so we received it, and in the page here, please close this window and return back to your application. Now there is one step that we need to do, which is we are waiting for this response from make call, because the make call is going here. That's why your browser also is waiting, so that should not happen. So you just run this inside a task. So you initiate this task and you don't wait, you immediately send the response back. Let's try this. It says that we need to rebuild and do it. So we'll stop this one. Stop. So because of this process, we don't need to wait for the response. We'll directly run this one and go back and show in your browser that this is done and closed. And when you receive it here in your auth window, the first step is done. So the next step is to exchange it for the token. Get request URL. Now what you will do, public static string get access token. Now what is this process? You need to provide it with a string code, which is nothing but the user grant. Go to auth VM, token service dot get access token with this code, and here in the auth VM you can store string g auth g access token. So g access token is equal to this process, and after this is done, you can use this one to make the first call and find out the username, and you can just after it is successfully logged in, you can move to the next page and show the username. But before that, we need to handle the method here in this access token. What we do here in this access token is that we already know that there is a token URL, but here we are not going to make a get method, as we have already seen before. You need to make a post call to this one now, We already have added Haley.rest, so it's very easy to do that. In this token service, let us set up static iClient. iClient is coming from Haley REST, which is nothing but a REST client. I will call it as G client is equal to new micro client, Fluent client, I believe, Fluent client with a base URL, but we don't need to give a base address because it will be changing frequently. So just a Fluent client, and this G client dot, this is a Fluent method, so G client dot with endpoint. What is my endpoint? Token URL is my endpoint, and for this endpoint, what I need to do, I need to add a certain set of here we need to make a certain set of URL encoded post. So you need to give code grant type, which is authorization code, redirect URI, which you have used before, and the client secret, client ID. So all these things you need to do, and you need to post it. Only then you will be receiving it. So we will do the same method like what we did before. We just copy this here. So this query param list, we have the client ID, redirect URI. Instead of response type, what we have, grant type is authorization code. Grant type is authorization code. Scope is removed. Client ID is there. You need something else called client secret. Take the client secret, put it there. So client ID, client secret, redirect URI, grant, and finally the most important one, which is the one that you have received, nothing but the code. Add the code. So you have a list of parameters which you need to use. So here we will say with query, sorry, this is not query param, this is with parameter. You have a request. Now here the parameter is expecting some kind of a request object. Now with the Haley REST, we have a new method called form encoded request. So this is kind of a request which will take the list of query params. So what it does is it will take these query parameters and then it will turn them into a query list like what we see before, what we have seen before, and it will get the concatenated string, and it will use the concatenated string and it will post it inside a body, like add it inside a body. Then you can say post async. You can put sync task of string, and we can say variable response is equal to await. So at this point we will be awaiting for the response that we have posted to the token URL, and after the response we can variable response string is equal to response dot as string. The response usually will be in the form of a stream or a content. As a string response, just convert it as a string response, or you can call this as raw response, and this one is response. And then if response dot is success status code is not success, then return null. Else if it is successful, then response dot content, whatever is the content, you will receive the content as a string format, which will obviously in the format of a JSON, I believe. So response content is equal to this one. This will definitely be in the format of a JSON, because if it is successful, we will be receiving a JSON like this, which will contain access token. We are not going to focus on refresh token or expiry, all those things. we'll only get the access token and we will just make the call. But in your application, just take the expiry every 1 hour, use the refresh token and get a new access token and all those things. But currently we'll keep it simple and fetch the access token now. So I do not use external libraries for parsing the JSON, but instead I will use the inbuilt one, which is system.text.json, which already comes with .NET 6. So we know that this content is a string, right? So we say JSON capital, right? JSON dot, come on, JSON node dot parse. So let us parse this string. What it will give us? Node. No, we should not get a node. This is wrong. JSON object. So we get the J object. So that object, we are sure that J object contains, it's nothing but kind of like a dictionary. J object contains this one. So if J object is equal to null, return null, or else if J object contains this dot toString. Let's say static string GA token. Did we have this one here? No, we are not storing it there. Return this token string back to the user, because that's what we are doing here. Return the string. Okay, it says that it could be null. If it is null, no, if it is null, we are already returning null. What else is there to do? Okay, there we go. Let us put a checkpoint here, and everything else looks fine. And at this point, this is what cannot implicitly convert. Okay, so async task. Nope, not a task. Void await. If you put task, it will not be working because it is expecting an action which is a void. So let's say that this is an async void. Let's put a key here and run the application. Now this time what it should happen, it should open up, go complete all the authorization, and finally return back the code, and which we will use to exchange it for the access token as well. Application is here, Google login. We go back here, and at this stage, mouse events, login is done. It told me to do that. Access token is here. That's it. Now remember, the code is different, access token is different. If I go to the text visualizer, it gave me the access token. Now you could have noticed we didn't put a checkpoint here, I believe. Why it didn't work? No symbols have been loaded because we cancelled the loading of the symbols. That's why. But in case we loaded the symbol, we would have hit it here. But this time we will do one thing, we will load the symbols. It is loading all the symbols, that's the problem. So we will do one thing. Tools, no, cancel it. Tools, symbol server. NuGet package manager, package manager settings. Symbols, do not load the symbols from NuGet. So what happens is we have so many NuGet packages, it is trying to load all the NuGet symbols. That's why we are getting this time. See, even then it is working like this. Maybe I need to clear cache and then run the application. Okay, this time we added all the libraries. Okay, mouse and events. Okay, there we go. We reached this point, and last time it was quite fast. This time we will do it one step at a time. Okay, so the response is received. Response is what 200 status, and you convert it into string, and the string response is access token. You can go to the response content view as a JSON visualizer. You got access token, you got refresh token, you got scope, token type, ID, everything. You can go back and just get only this JSON object. When you return it as a JSON object, there are 6. You can call for access token, expires in all these values, but we need only access token. We got it and we received it here. So we now know that at this point we will be able to receive this access token. After this, what we need from this token service, we don't need anything. From our Auth VM, I'm going to create one more client here and call it as G client, like this. G client is equal to new micro fluent client. We will reuse this client. Maybe if you need if you have a base URL, you will be using the same client again and again, but for this Auth VM we will use for all the G queries, we will use the same client. So now what happens, we have the G access token which is readily available, and the next step is check the username. If verified genuine, move to next page. So how do we do that? In the Auth VM, we are going to add a property, and this property will be an internal property. An internal property, I will say that the success token also let it be internal string G access token. Or why do we need to put this access token here? Let us put it in the global so that it will be accessible outside also. Internal string GA token internal bool authorized. Okay, there we go. And what it says, cannot declare instance in a static member. Of course. Static internal static void clear. So this should not clear the host, but this should clear GA token is equal to null, authorized is equal to false. False. And callbacks is equal to new dictionary. So we will clear this one, this 3 we will clear, but we will not clear the iHost. The methods are totally fine because we don't have any problem with the methods. Now in the auth controller, whenever the authorization is successful, when the auth VM, whenever the authorization is successful, globals dot GA token, then we make a call, and the client, we don't need to put the client here. Let's keep the fluent client, the server itself, the globals itself. Internal static iClient is equal to new micro fluent client static iClient G client. Let's call it as G client for making all Google related calls, and whenever you clear, G client is equal to new fluent client. Cool. Now in the Auth VM, globals.g client dot add. So now that we have received the access token, for all the subsequent calls we need to add it. So what I'm going to do, this is kind of a bearer token, right? So add set authenticator. Set authenticator, there are several auth providers. We need token auth provider. So token auth provider will be calling it in the form of a bearer. Let me go back to the Postman to see something. Whenever I make this request with my authorization as a bearer token, what happens? It will be like this. The request coders, I will be adding an authorization key, and then I will be adding the bearer along with my token. This is what I will be adding every time I do this. So the same thing, we have a token auth provider with set token code. So you are basically setting the token inside your gauth client. And I think when you do this one to your client, you don't need to store the token elsewhere. So what we do, we will call it as variable GA token. We will save it here. Go back to your globals. Remove this GA token. We don't need it anymore. Come back to your author. So the global token, now you have set the authenticator. Set authenticator. So next time when you make a call with this G client, it will use the access token for all your subsequent calls. So for instance, let us make a call here now, globals dot, or we can say that is authorized, globals dot authorized is equal to true. So now we have authorized true, and after this stage, when the authorization itself is true, what we need to do is we need to send a message to the auth VM that we are going to close this application. So you can set up the dialog result is equal to true, but now again we are facing another problem. The problem is that we are in the view model, we are not in the view. If it is in the view, we can easily say, okay, view dot view model is equal to dialog result is equal to this and this and this. But since we are here, we will not be able to do that. There are so many different ways to achieve it. For instance, we can send in whenever we are calling some method or whenever we are initializing, we can send in the view here and we can store the reference of view here. But that is all kind of sound like anti-pattern. Go back to this auth view. Where is it? Come on, where are you? Here. Okay, whenever you set this auth VM data context, instead of doing this one, you have from Haley, we have an internal way of mixing or making the window linking with the respective view model, and it will still make a connection between them too. So you can, when you close the window from auth VM, the window view model view will also be closed. To do that process, instead of doing like this, go back to your app, and when you are calling this new window, just call something called as window observer. VO is equal to new window observer. So what it does, it will take a window like a window, and it will also monitor some kind of view model. In our case, auth VM, new auth VM. So what it does here, it takes this auth VM and it will associate it with the view model, but it will also observe both the window and also it will observe the view model. So whenever the view model you say that it is closed, the window will be closed. From view, whenever the view is initialized, view model will get the notification. So all these are already implemented and handled in the base VM. When you press the F12, you could see that it has invoke VM closed. You can call this method, which will say that view model is closed, and you can call all those functions. So to make it simple, let's go back here to base VM and say view model. You need to call invoke view model closed. How do you call it? Protected void. So you need to call this method invoke view model closed with sender, and then you will be calling the result. So I'm just saying invoke view model closed, sender is this, and result is true because it is successful. This will then close the window as well. Usually from view model to close a window, it is little difficult because you don't have the reference, and setting it up is a very huge task. To avoid all these things, you can directly use the base VM and call the invoke view model close. So you close the view model, and the window observer here will observe that okay, view model is closed. Now go ahead and close my window as well, and the window is closed. And after the window is closed at this point, we know how the result here, and then we can go ahead with the home window. And the home window, when on initialized, we will make a call. Instead of this one, we will make a new class called home view model, and remove the button. Go here, remove the button, and instead of text, just put a binding there, binding, and we will be adding user name. Currently it is empty, but we will shortly add this username inside our home VM, public class home VM, which will come from base VM, and public home VM, and Haley set property string username, and that's it. So when you set this username, it will be displayed to the user. When the application itself is opened, and the page itself is initialized, and we have not yet associated this home VM with our window. So let's go back to the window here and say when this is initialized, this dot data context is equal to new home VM, which is coming under Google Auth dot view model. Again, we can set up another window observer for this, but let us take baby steps at this time. And whenever this home VM is initialized, we call initialize method, which is nothing but public void initialize. It doesn't need to be public, it could be private. And in the initialize method, what we do, get the global G client and fetch the username and display. Quite simple and straightforward. And globals dot G client dot with endpoint. For which endpoint? We already have seen this endpoint here. This is my endpoint, and which is a get method. For this endpoint, get async. There is no parameters, nothing, just get async. And you also have something called inherit authentication. In case the authentication is not inherited from the client, you can inherit authentication, but this one we will comment it out because by default it will be authenticated. That's what I believe. If it not, we will check that one shortly. Async, come on, wait, user info is equals this one. Okay, there we go. What it says, user info does not. Okay, I think I need some sleep. Wait. Okay, now that we have the user info is obviously in the form of a response, response. So raw user response raw, and the variable user response is user info is equals to await user info raw dot as string response is sync. Okay, if user info dot is success status code, if not success status code, return, or else user info dot content, which is in the form of a get down here, which is in the form of a GUID, JSON, which contains email, name, email. So we know that it is a JSON, so variable j object is equal to JSON object dot parse this one. If j object is equal to null, return, or else j object of email dot toString, and along with username we will also have something called email, and take this email, go back to my home window, and make another one, paste email. So basically we have two instead of grid. Let's put it as a stack panel, and stack panel is obviously always at the top, so vertical alignment is center. So we got it here. Save this one, and this one, let it not be email be like only 24, name be big, and between them two let us add some kind of margin is equal to 0,15. so there is a margin. Go back to home VM, and there we go, email is equal to this, and username is equal to name. So on successful initialization we should be logging in out of the Google Auth window. We will make this call immediately, and we will be displaying the email and then the name in our window. Login. Okay, now something weird is happening because the application itself is not initializing. Did we make some mistake? Did we make some changes? Okay, let me build the application. Go back to my Auth VM. We do have something called Google login, command login, and let us go back to our assembly here. We are starting the authorization with some kind of window observer, and window observer we are saying that this is my new Auth VM, and so something is happening. So what we do, let's take out the new Auth VM and say VM AVM is equal to new Auth VM, and just say AVM, and just go ahead and press F12 here to see. When we associate like this, it obviously subscribe all. Okay, it just subscribes and it just monitors, but it never assigns that view model. That's the problem there. Okay, then in that case we don't need to keep it here. Cut out, go to the Auth window. Here you can set it up. Window observer, we observer is equal to new window observer. This one new auth VM. What's happening? I was under the impression that the window observer will link them both. Now it was being done by the dependency injection. I made a mistake though. So because of which it was not communicating. So if it is not communicating, then there is no point in adding it there. Then this dot data text is equal to view model. Perfect. We take the same. We no longer leave this one, right? We take the same. Go to home controller. Do the same here, but instead of auth VM, we say home VM. That's it. Fantastic. Here we go. Google login, and the page is opened up. Mouse events. Login is done. Let us remove all the checkpoints. Remove this checkpoint as well. Mouse events, YouTube at gmail.com. There we go. We need to add one more thing. Along with this, we'll add a button which will invoke close. So we can again go back and test it again with another account. So this time what I will do, along with this one, at the end I will add plain button. The end, and this plain button I will say with this 180, corner radius is 10, height is 30, and content is sign out, and background is. How can I complete a video without using purple? White. There we go. Font size is 16 plus, and when you press this button it should sign out. So we add a prop I command, and this one is command. What was the other command there? Command Google login. So we'll call it as command sign out. New delegate command, which is sign out, and remove them all. Generator method sign out. This should invoke VM closed, sent by this, and true. Perfecto. And this one, copy it and give it to your command here. Perfect. So now what happens? We will be shown with view. Let's minimize this. So our view is here. Login. Go inside. Login with mouse events. Minimize it. Mouse events. Sign out. Come back to the page. Login. Sign in with front end frenzy. Minimize. Front end frenzy. So we made two calls. First call we logged in with mouse events. Second call we logged in with front end frenzy, and both the times it did all the authorization process, everything, and then it authorized our application. There we go. So this is it. We now managed to achieve whatever we wanted to do with OAuth 2.